Part 4. Chapter 10. Swamped. Now that they could breathe, Randy and his crew had the luxury of considering what was going to happen to them next. The sweet relief of the air was undercut by lingering disappointment that the rescue crew still had not dropped down a phone, a radio, anything. Not knowing what was going on and not being able to tell their families that they were still alive seemed a form of torture. A lot of the guys kept complaining about that, Randy says. Why no phone? Why no communication? And I just told them, they can't. I explained the whole deal to them, what they were trying to do. The truth is, Randy himself wasn't exactly sure what was going on, but he was smart enough not to let his crew know that. Keeping morale up, that was the most important thing, he says. He surmised that the rescuers were trying to create a kind of pressurized air bubble underground that would keep the water back from them. Otherwise, Randy thought, why not drill another hole and drop a phone down? That was the only reason I could think of, because they didn't want to break the seal, he says. So that's what I tried to explain to the guys. They were blowing us an air bubble. Randy's theory was more or less correct. Rescuers above ground knew that the greatest danger to the men who were trapped underground was water, not air. John Urosek, a mine ventilation expert who worked for the U.S. Department of Labor's Mine Safety Health Administration, believed that if they pumped a large volume of highly pressurized air into the mine, they might be able to create a pocket of air that would keep the water off the men while they drilled a larger rescue shaft. Urosek's decision was controversial, but with so much water flooding in and so little time, there weren't many alternatives. Underground, the pressurized air may have slowed the water's advance, but it didn't stop it. Blaine. Some of us were working our asses off to get those walls built. The pressure from the air had blown one of them out, and then we had to start all over on a couple of walls because of where the air hole came down. We needed to have the air hole inside the walls, so we had to rebuild a couple of them in different spots. It was a ton of work, especially because we were so wet and cold and tired. The hardest thing was seeing that water coming up. I mean, we could breathe better now, but that water never stopped. We would walk down through the entry and see it and measure it, and it was coming up a couple of crosscuts every hour. Just this slow climb up the mine toward us. So within a couple of hours, we went from thinking we were going to suffocate to thinking we were going to drown. Randy. I kept telling them, hey, he's trying to get enough pressure in here to keep the water off us. But not everyone thought it would work. It was a battle, just to keep up morale. That was a big deal. We were all tired and wet and freezing. Like Unger, I know we figured we was going to die, John says. I ain't dying in here. I'm getting out. And I never let it get to my head that we weren't going to make it. Mo. I remember telling Blaine a couple of times, just don't worry about it. We'll get out of it. We ain't fucked yet. I didn't know Blaine real well. I just met him when he started in the mine about 6 or 7 months earlier. But I felt me and Blaine was close. We got along good, bullshitted a lot. Me and him both fished a lot, and we talked about that. I think he was more worried than anybody. Even when we was working, building walls and stuff, he never stopped. Honestly, he busted his ass. I don't know how he did it. Everybody else was beat from the lack of oxygen, but Blaine never stopped. Blaine. We had too many guys laying around. I wasn't pissed, because I knew a lot of them was older and their energy was gone. But still, I wanted to get those walls built. I thought it might save us. I even yelled at the guys resting at the bolter, a long, low drilling rig on rubber wheels with 2 braces lifted toward the roof of the mine. I said, I don't want to be a fucking dick or whatever, but we've got to get these walls built. Flathead. At one point, we started running out of bricks for the walls. Me, Hound Dog, and Harpo had knocked the return wall down, and we was carrying some of the bricks up by hand. We got that one done, and then we had one more to go. When I went down to grab some more bricks, I saw the water was way up. I mean, it is gaining. Gaining. It was already ankle deep. 10-15 minutes later, when I went down again, it was up to my waist. Boogie. I was one of the last guys to give in and say we weren't going to make it. I mean, I heard Blaine talk, Hound Dog talk about we ain't going to make it, and I never gave in. I never really gave up hope until we were working on that last wall. And I think it started out with Blaine laying the block, starting the wall. The water was only about 2 inches deep at the time. So we laid 4 or 5 down flat to start the corner up so we could go across, and Unger came down at me at that time. A lot of the guys were up at the bolter, Hound Dog, Harpo. I don't know where Randy was at. It was just Flathead, me, and Unger came down, and then Blaine, starting this wall. And Blaine laid a couple of blocks down. I was going to get a couple of blocks to lay down, and water was coming in so fast now I couldn't even get my block laid down in the water. They were starting to float. I thought, geez, we got to get this wall up. The water was coming up, coming around the corner to us, and the air pipe, was right there, and the noise was so loud it was just screaming, and I could hardly stand to be near it. Unger. While we was building that last wall, Fogel came down. I said to him, "We've got some big trouble." He looked at the water and he said, "What the hell you been doing?" I said, "What do you mean, what the hell have I been doing?" He was kind of, stressed. I said, "What do you think I've been doing? I'm trying to build this wall and it ain't working." Boogie looked at me and said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I don't know. I think I'm going to die, to be honest with you." We stood there a few minutes. The water's just pouring in, and Randy was trying to throw block up. It was hopeless. Blaine just looked at us and said, "I'm too young to die." Then he headed up to the bolter. Randy. Blaine asked me if I had a pen. He didn't tell me what it was for, but I knew. He was going to write a note to his family. I didn't say nothing. I just gave him the pen. Blaine. I just quit. I used the excuse I was tired because there was like 5 guys up there at the bolter sleeping, and I went up and woke them up and told them, "The water's coming in on the last wall. We're in trouble." But basically I quit because I wanted the peaceful time. I knew what was coming. Unger. After Boogie and Randy went up to the bolter, I was the last guy down there. I stayed for a while watching the water pour in. Then I walked up and stopped at the feeder, where there was some dry coal. I sat down in the coal bin for a bit. I was tired and I prayed. I needed to get myself right with God. Chapter 11. How to Drown with Dignity. Unger. When I walked up to the bolter, the other guys were all there, some sitting, some on their knees. They were all good men and friends. They've seen you at your best, and they've seen you at your worst, and we were at our worst right there. I mean, you were never going to see these guys again. You were never going to work with these guys again. You were never going to talk all kinds of crap that you talk to them, or whatever you say to them. Just like poor Harpo, man. As a joke, I used to send rocks home in his bucket all the time. Stupid stuff. I'm not going to be able to do this kind of stuff to these guys anymore. You're looking at everybody and you think, well, we're all going to die together. This is it. This is the bottom line. Boogie. I seen death on John Unger's face, and Hound Dog's face, and Tucker's face. I guess I had it on my face too, death. We knew that at that point we were going to die. Blaine was crying. A lot of us were crying. Their final refuge was a small area at the top of entry 4, 30 feet wide by 70 feet long, with most of the space taken up by the big, heavy bolter. The only light they had were the lamps on their helmets, which they kept off most of the time, and a small lantern, miners call it a bug lamp, that Randy had found. It cast a shadowy light just enough to illuminate the whites of their eyes and to give a shine to the black coal that pressed in around them. Hound Dog. It was like a bad dream. I was trying to wake up, home in bed with my wife, and say, "Wow, boy, that was some dream." I just could not believe that this was happening. I thought of my brother-in-law who passed away at age 49. I know how hard that was on the family. And then I'd be another one, 49. Blaine. I thought about fishing with my dad and with my kids, trips to the lake, the wind blowing, the water rocking the boat, and I thought about my wife. I told the guys, I didn't kiss her goodbye today. She was mowing the lawn and I was late and I just waved. I always kiss her goodbye, but for some reason, I don't know why, I didn't kiss her that day. That bothered me a lot. Of all the days not to kiss her, you know? Blaine ripped up an old resin box. Resin is used to secure the roof bolts. That was resting on the bolter, and used the cardboard for paper. He switched on his helmet lamp, his hands shaking, and used Randy's pen to compose his final thoughts to his family. Blaine. I'd seen a lot of reports of old mine accidents, and they'd say how they'd found a father and son hugging each other when they dug them up, you know, and they'd have written their farewell letters, and I just remembered that and thought it was a good idea. I didn't say anything to anyone about what I wrote, and I still haven't. When I finished, I looked at my watch. It was 11:45 a.m. on Thursday. I wrote the time down on the note. And then, after I finished, I asked if anyone else wanted to write something, and everyone's like, yeah. So I passed the pen off to my father-in-law, and that's how it started. Tucker. When I started writing the note, I just broke down. I couldn't take it no more. Mo. I'm just sitting there thinking, staring at the ground. I didn't want to write that note because I wasn't giving up hope. But that water kept coming. I took the pen. I was thinking about my family. I was thinking about my kids a lot. I wasn't angry. I was just thinking, Christ, I'm going to die. My note was short. I made it short because I wanted everybody to have time to write their note, and the water was coming really fast. For Mo, there was some terrible deja vu in this moment. For the second time in 12 hours, he believed his life was over. Mo, this time it was different. This time it was going to happen. When I was on the other side of that water, I had that little bit of hope. Maybe the other guys would come back. Maybe I'd figure out a way across the water. But this here was obvious. Our backs were up against the wall. The water was coming. We were going to drown. Randy. The one thing I thought about when I was writing was that I would never be able to walk my daughter down the aisle. Just the idea of never seeing my family again, that was the worst for me there. I wish I could have told my kids I loved them more often. I thought of that. And my parents, I wish I could have told them more, which I didn't. Unger, when you write that note, that's the bottom line. That's as bad as it gets. You've played all your cards. There's no way out. That was the lowest point for me. I always made a promise to my wife that I would never do that. I would always come out of the mine one way or the other, and that I would never, ever write that letter. But I wrote it. Flathead. Blaine grabbed a plastic bucket of bits off the bolter and dumped a whole bucket out on the ground. When we were done, we put all the notes into the bucket and sealed it up with electrical tape. Then we wired it to the bolter so it wouldn't float away. In making their final preparations for their deaths, there was only one question left. What would happen to their bodies? Almost as nightmarish as the idea of drowning was the idea of their bodies being left to float aimlessly through the caverns and corridors of the mine. It was Tucker, the mechanical wizard on the crew, the man who could fix anything, who came up with a solution. Tucker, I found a piece of cable from the miner. 40 feet long or something, and I said, we might as well all be tied together so they don't have to go hunting for our bodies all over the mine and in the mud. That way they can find us all and we'll be together. It will be easy. So Tucker tied one end of the cable securely to the bolter. At 20 tons or so, that machine wasn't going anywhere. Then he slipped the cable through his miner's belt and passed it on. Blake, Hound Dog, Flathead, Bookie, all tied in. Mo, Harpo, Unger, and Randy refused. Mo. Somebody said, come on, tie up. And I said, no. When the water gets up to my waist, I'll tie. I wasn't giving up yet. Unger. I only tied off for a little while, and that was a little bit later. I couldn't handle it. I thought, I'm not doing this. Their preparations complete, there was nothing to do but wait. At this point, the water was about 30 feet below them. It looked as gentle as a lake, just a big pool of flat black water inching slowly toward them. Every one of these guys was closely acquainted with death. They had seen friends crushed by roof falls and dismembered by machinery. They had had close calls themselves. Readying yourself for this fate, calculating the odds, playing the angles, was part of what it meant to be a coal miner. It was, in some awful way, the natural course of things. But nobody had thought about water. Nobody was prepared to drown. And the terrible irony was, Randy and his crew were all passionate fishermen. Many of the best moments of their lives had been spent out on the water, in the lakes around Somerset, hooking bass and bluegill with their sons or fathers. Flathead. I wished we'd just run out of air and pass out because I didn't know how I would do this. Are you going to put your head right to the roof and try to keep as much air in your lungs as you can? Or are you just going to go under? Hound Dog. Boogie and I were probably the closest of all 9 people. I went to school with Boog. We graduated together, worked on all different kinds of mines. I've known Boogie probably for 40 years. So while we were sitting there, I said to Boog, can you believe this? You know this is it. This is a hell of a way to go. I always thought the mines might take me someday, but I thought it would be a piece of rock there somewhere with my name on it that would come down and smash me. I always kind of thought that, but never drowning. I don't know about you, but I think that would be the one hell of a way to go. Harpo, I had my own ideas about this. I wasn't going to sit there and wait for that water to come up on me and drown me. That's why I wouldn't tie myself with everybody, because I wasn't going to sit there and listen to all of my buddies, my family, choke and gag. I wasn't going to listen to that. I was going to take my last breath and dive in, and when my body figured it needed more air to come up, I ain't going to get none. I'm gone. Boogie, all I kept thinking about is getting myself up against the wall of coal and breathing my last breath of air. That was on my mind a lot. I told the guys, I don't want to drown. I hate water to start with. I like to swim and I love to fish, but I hate water. That's the worst thing there is, drowning. So I kept thinking about how I was going to do this, because I'm a Catholic. Harpo said, boys, when it comes up to our necks, don't mind me. I'm just going to slip under. And I thought maybe that was suicide by slipping under. And Catholics don't believe in suicide. So I figured, I'm going to raise my head and breathe the last air I can breathe, and maybe a miracle will happen. But I ain't going under until I have to. Mo, how do you drown with dignity? We talked about it. People fall out of boats and they drown, but when you know it's going to happen to you, how do you make yourself drown? Am I going to just start swallowing this water? Because nobody ever takes water into their lungs on purpose. So how do you do that? Do you inhale it like a cigarette? That's what I was thinking. Do I inhale this water like a cigarette? I decided that when it got up to my neck, I was going to swim out. I never said nothing, but that's what I decided. Who wants to struggle for that last breath? You're going to die. There's no hope. You ain't going to survive in that much water, even if it would quit coming up for very long. Boogie, at that moment, boy, a lot of stuff ran through my mind. Like my last spring gobbler I ever killed. It had a 10-inch beard. I was proud of that. I'm 50 years old. My kids graduated. I'm trying to make myself feel better before I die, you know? I'm thinking about the funeral, about what day they're going to find us. Flathead, I was thinking, hell, I'm going to die here and never going to see my wife and son again. This is his first year of hunting. I'm never going to get to go hunting with him. And he's my boy, you know? My boy. At that time, I wasn't a firm believer in God, and I'm thinking, man, I'm going to go to hell, and the rest of my family is going to be in heaven. So then I started praying. For most of the guys, their final reckoning was a private one, but just as Blaine had taken the lead in writing a note to his family, he also took the lead in opening up about his deepest fears. Unger, we were sitting there and Blaine said, "Hey, John." I said, "What?" "I've got a question to ask you, and you're the only one that can answer this for me." "Okay," I said. "How heavy is this?" He said, "Well, I want to ask you this, and you decide." So I said, "Okay." He said, "I'm not baptized, John. Do you think I'll go to heaven?" It was heavy, you know. He was crying. "What are you going to say?" "Well, nope. Some big news for you, Blaine. You are going to hell, buddy. Your ass is history. You're going to burn. You're toast. Plus, you don't want him flipping out down there. You don't want everybody going over the edge." So I thought about it, and I was sincere when I answered him. I said, "Well, Blaine, this is only in my world. But in John Unger's world, I truly and honestly believe that God loves you whether you're baptized or not. You're a good guy. You try to do what's right. And I really, truly believe that God will take care of us and that you will go to heaven. From the bottom of my heart, I believe that." Blaine, Unger made me feel a little better. The one thing I asked God, I wanted to get a glimpse of my family before I was gone. I hoped it would be like the movies, you know, when your soul rises up through the air and you can see what's down below. I just wanted one quick look. I just wanted to know that my family was okay. As the water rose, it was now about 20 feet away. Randy and his crew were confronted by a final dilemma. Were they going to stay there at the bolter and let the water rise over them, or would they scramble to the highest ground in the mine, a small area a few hundred feet away in the back of entry one? It was only a few feet higher, but it would buy them a few more breaths of air. As Mo puts it, if water comes up on a mouse, he's going to keep running until he's out of water. So will any animal. To me, it was instinct. Mo, I finally said, Randy, we gotta go to one. We gotta go to one. He's like, yeah, we gotta go to one. And he told everybody to get up. They were moving to higher ground over in entry 1. I think somebody said, what the fuck for? We're going to die anyway. And Randy said, no, we're going to 1. It ain't over yet. He always encouraged us. Randy, don't give up. Flathead, I was thinking, we're just going to get over there and sit for another 5, 10, 15 minutes and prolong the agony. What's the difference? I mean, we can die here, or we'll go over there and wait to die. Harpo, I was having a hard time with this. You know you're going to die. It's just a matter of time. You know what, guys, I said. I read the paper every day, but I probably read it different than you guys. I look at the front page, and then I flip it over and I look at the obituaries. The only difference, the paper tomorrow is going to have our names in it. Mo, my opinion, just my opinion, is that some of the guys, they gave up then. They were tired, cold, and they'd had enough. They were going to drown right there, and they wasn't going to go to higher ground. I didn't understand that. Randy and Mo got their way. One of the guys unwired the bucket of notes from the bolter, then they all headed over to the entry 1. The guys who were cabled together remained tied, duck-walking through the mine like a hunchback chain gang. Mo, when we left the bolter, the mood changed a little. I don't know why, but as we were walking, Blaine cracked a joke that made everybody laugh. He just looked at us and said, any of you guys want to have sex before we die? Chapter 12, Drilling and Pumping. Rescue officials cautioned family members that news of the 9 taps didn't necessarily mean that all 9 men were alive. Maybe they misinterpreted the taps. It could have been 3 taps, 3 times. It could have been some other signal, or simply random pounding. And they warned the families that the situation underground was still dire. The water was still flooding into the mine and showed no signs of letting up. It didn't matter. There was no denying the hope and optimism that briefly filled the fire hall that Thursday afternoon. At least we knew they weren't all dead, Leslie recalls. At least we knew that someone was alive down there, and they still had a chance to get out of the mine alive. Pennsylvania Governor Mark Schweiker had arrived at the rescue site around noon, and after being briefed by rescue workers at the site, made his way over to the fire hall. Governor Schweiker, who had become governor after Tom Ridge resigned 10 months earlier to join the Bush administration as Director of Homeland Security, was a virtual unknown to most of the families before this, but his affable style, his can-do optimism, and his penchant for blue denim shirts would win him many admirers in the coming hours, as well as a few detractors. Governor Schweiker was, with help from rescue workers and officials from the state's Department of Environmental Protection, briefed the families on the next phase of the rescue operation. They had considered every possible option, including sending scuba divers into the mine, but they ruled that out after realizing that the divers would have to swim 1.5 miles into the mine in cold black water full of all kinds of hazards, corridors, and unpredictable currents. Then what would they do with the miners once they reached them? A rescue hole was the only way. Governor Schweiker explained that a super drill, the word sounded like it was coined by someone on the governor's PR team, had just arrived at the site from Shinston, West Virginia. The drill could cut a 29-inch hole in solid rock and was at that very moment being set up. It was a slow process. The drilling rig and its support equipment arrived on 5 different trucks and required a complex network of air compressors and water lines to be set up before the rig began operation. In addition, a steel sleeve had to be installed in the top 20 feet of the hole, then set in concrete to help circulate air around the drill bit. Because of all this, the actual drilling was not expected to begin until about 7:30 p.m. Once the hole was drilled, a 22-inch wide rescue capsule would be lowered into the mine and would bring the men up one by one. The capsule had been designed in the 1970s for just such a tricky mine rescue, but no one at the site had any experience using it or any idea how well it would work. This rescue plan was presented to the families as if it were a fairly straightforward operation. In fact, it was enormously difficult and risky. These big drills, normally used to probe for natural gas, work more like hammers than conventional drills. Using a rapid piston-like motion, they crush the rock rather than auger through it. Different types of rock require different drilling techniques. Limestone is common in this region and brutally difficult to hammer through, and if you try to push it too hard, too fast, the bit could get jammed or break. The hole had to be plumb straight, too. If it wasn't, it'd be almost impossible to lower the rescue capsule down into the mine. Normally, a big hole like this takes 3 or 4 days to drill. Governor Schweitzer told the families they'd have it done in about 18 hours. Just as important as the drilling, however, was getting the water pumped out of the mine. At the moment, the only thing keeping Randy and his crew from being swamped was the warm air being blown into the mine at more than 350 pounds per square inch of pressure, creating an air bubble in the highest corner of the mine. If they tried to open a rescue hole before the water level went down, they risked popping the bubble and instantly drowning the men. So it was imperative to get the water under control. Governor Schweitzer told the families that an 18-wheeler was rushing 5 big pumps down from Bridgeport, Connecticut, under a police escort. Powered by 425 horsepower engines, these huge pumps were capable of pumping 5,000 gallons of water per minute and were usually used to empty shipping canals. A number of smaller pumps had already been set up at the mine entrance, where the water was quickly creating a 10-foot deep and rising lake in what had once been an open pit, submerging machinery in most of the mine maintenance building. In addition, several dewatering holes were also being drilled into the lower portions of the mine so that submersible pumps could be dropped down. Once all the pumps were up and running, the rescue team hoped to be able to empty the water out of the mine faster than it was pouring in, and thus beginning to lower the water level. For the families, joy soon faded to apprehension. Before they heard the taps, someone had feared that this was already a recovery mission. The hell was simply in waiting to find out if their loved ones were dead or alive. Now that it was clearly a rescue operation, every hour was precious. As Blaine's father, Blaine Mayhew Sr., put it, this was now a race against time. Thursday afternoon, the families got their first chance to visit the rescue site. When they arrived, they saw a cow pasture that had been transformed into a frantic tableau of big men and big machinery. The rescue hole itself was just a few hundred feet behind an old farmhouse. There were 2 huge equipment barns on the slope above, and a tall blue silo with an American flag painted on the top. Cows poked their noses through the electric fence nearby, and a black mutt wandered around, sweetly oblivious to what was at stake, looking for someone to scratch its ears. Overhead, news choppers hovered, kicking up dust when they banked in for a close-up. A half-dozen heavy air compressors roared. The big rig that would drill the first rescue hole, which was known to Dwayne Yost, the contractor, was doing the drilling. Simply as Rig 18 was already standing tall, nearly ready to begin cutting into the earth. Annette Fogel. When they first asked if we wanted to visit the site, I didn't want to go. My son Matthew talked me into it. He kept saying, "Mom, I really think you need to go over there." So we took a small bus from the fire hall. Maybe 20 of us were in it. When we got there, they tried to explain what was going on. If we had any questions, we could ask them. But there was so much noise there, you couldn't hear what they were trying to explain to you. I mean, it was loud. While I was out there, all that went through my mind was the fact that there's 240 feet of dirt there, and underneath it all is Randy. That's what I thought. I mean, I didn't need to understand those drills and all of that. I knew they were getting the air down. I knew that the big drill was there too. I didn't need to understand how it worked. I just wanted them to get the hole down and help and get them out of there. So going out on the site was not much help. I felt worse because I kept staring at the dirt and kept thinking, he's down there. Leslie Mayhew. I didn't want to go out to the site, but something told me I had to. When I got there, I just sat on the back of an ambulance and watched. I could see down into the area where they were getting the rig set up and all the equipment they were bringing in, and that's when I thought, what am I doing here? I wanted to go down and touch the ground above where the guys were trapped, but they wouldn't let me near it. Sandy Popernak. That fire hall was the most depressing place I'd seen in my life. I really needed to get out of there for a while. When I was in there, I had a very pessimistic view of what was happening. I just thought, there's no way that he can be alive. Then I went to that site and saw everyone working so hard. Everything seemed so positive that he was coming out of there alive. I felt a lot better. For some of the younger children, the trip to the rescue site was their first chance to see for themselves what had happened to their fathers. Sandy Popernak. My sons Daniel and Lucas both wanted to see the site. Lucas is 10, Daniel is 9. They're both close with their dad, but Lucas particularly. You know how most kids write about their mom when they have to do something in school? Lucas wrote about his dad every time. Like for Valentine's Day, he was his dad's Valentine. I always got kind of offended thinking, what's wrong with this picture? But everything was his dad. He just adores him. So I took them both down there. I pointed to the air pipe that was going down and said, that's what's giving Daddy air so that Daddy can breathe. I pointed to the big rig, the drill, and just explained to them exactly what it was and how it worked, and tried to keep it as simple as I could. My niece was with us, and she was helping to explain too. Then after we had been out there a while, I said, okay, I'm going to take you guys back to the fire hall. Right then and there, Daniel lost it. I mean, he just started crying. Lucas did fine. He held very strong for me. Most of the families returned to the fire hall and stayed there, but both Sandy and Missy ended up going back to the site after they dropped their kids off with relatives. Rescue officials had asked all family members to remain in the fire hall, but in a situation like this, neither Sandy nor Missy was too interested in taking orders from anyone. Sandy would end up returning to the fire hall later that night, but Missy was at the site for the long haul. I wasn't going to leave there until they brought my husband up, dead or alive. Missy Filippi. On Thursday night, I watched one driller work for about 7 hours. I mean, he was moving. He was hip-hopping. He was up and down and every which way. I never seen a man work so hard. He made me tired just looking at him. So I laid down on the bank, and I could hear that drill, and I could feel my mind drifting. I was thinking about my son and what was going to happen to us. Then I fell asleep. After the drilling began at about 7:30 p.m., there was nothing for the families to do but wait. John Weir held an impromptu briefing every hour or so in the fire hall, keeping them up to date on the foot-by-foot progress of the drilling and pumping. Food kept arriving from local restaurants, pizza from Pizza Hut, lasagna from the Oakhurst Tea Room, boxes of eclairs and old-fashioned donuts from Dunkin' Donuts, sandwiches from Eaton Park, fried chicken, sandwiches, cases of soda, coffee, juice, power bars, cakes, pies, you name it, they had it. Nobody was going hungry during this ordeal. Thursday turned out to be a hot, humid night, and it was even hotter in the fire hall. After Weir's briefings, a lot of people would migrate outside, hanging around under a big tree up in the back parking lot, or at a few picnic tables nearby. They'd smoke and stare at the ground and drink sodas and share memories and hopes until they saw Weir's silver pickup pull up again. Then they'd all hustle back down to the fire hall to hear Weir tick off the slow progress of the drill. Down 40 feet. Then a couple of hours or so later, down 60 feet. Then down 80 feet. Annette Vogel. The weight was hard on everyone. They told us 18 hours from the time the drill started, so it was just a countdown. My daughter Brittany was there the whole time. She handled it very well. At one point that night, though, she did break down at the table and she cried. I asked her what was going on, and she said, I miss my daddy. I want my daddy. Leslie Mayhew. I'd been crying so hard on the night before, my eyes were practically swelled shut. Thursday night it felt better. I felt better. After we got back from the site, I decided Blaine was going to need something to wear when he got out from under there. So I went up to the shower house at the mine, and I asked one of the guys, can you please get me Blaine's clothes out? That's all I wanted, was his clothes and shoes. And after he gave them to me, I sat there in the truck for a few minutes and was just smelling The Rock, the wrestler, t-shirt that he'd had on that day. I wanted to be close to him, you know, but I was also looking for some kind of sign, some feeling that he was trying to tell me something, because I was sure if he was dead, I would have known it somehow. But I didn't get no sign, so that made me happy. Annette Vogel. I thought about a lot of things that night. I remembered back when Randy decided to go into the mines, not long after we married. The only time it scared me, him working underground, was when I was pregnant with our first child. I had had a dream one time that he had died, and it's the only time that I had been afraid and wanted him to quit. Hopeful as she may have been, Annette was still haunted by Randy's last goodbye. Annette Vogel. The first night my dad showed up over there, I sat outside the fire hall with him and cried. I said, Dad, I'm such a bonehead. He said, "No, you're not. Why do you think you're a bonehead?" I said, "Mom told me many, many times that you don't let the sun go down on your anger, and that's what I did." I told my dad how Randy had gone to work that morning and how I was mad at him. I said to my dad, "I kissed him, but I didn't tell him I loved him." And he turned and he looked at me. I carried that look with me. I did, all during that time. So I said, "Dad, when Randy comes out of there, the first thing I want to say to him is that I love him. I owe him that."